Christians are generally familiar with the concept of the rapture. Most Christians, however, only know a single theory of when the rapture is to take place, referred to as the pre-tribulation rapture, but there are multiple theories regarding when the rapture will take place. Many Christians may ask, why does it matter when Christians get raptured so long as we are raptured? This video will explain why it is critical for Christians to have a general idea of the other rapture theories, regardless of which one they believe. But first, for those who are unfamiliar with the rapture, it is described in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verses 16 to 18. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who remain, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. The rapture is also described in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verses 51 to 52. Behold, I am telling you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. When read in context, it is clear these verses are referring to an event that will take place in the end times when Jesus returns to judge the world. According to these passages, during the end times before the world is judged, Jesus descends on a cloud with his angels. A trumpet sounds and the dead Christians are taken up to Jesus first, then the Christians who are alive follow right after. This is the rapture. But if Christians are raptured in the end times, then why does it matter when they are taken up? It is because under some of the other rapture theories, an ignorant decision could be fatal and jeopardize their salvation. But knowledge will guide them to the right decision. This video will reveal what that critical decision is. Now that the rapture event has been established, the question is, when does the rapture take place according to the Bible? To answer this question, we need to know what to look for in the Bible that will give us an idea that the rapture has taken place. Revelation chapter 21 verses 1 to 4 describes John's vision of heaven as follows. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. So, if there is no crying, death, or pain, heaven is essentially paradise. This is consistent with Paul's description when he was caught up in the third heaven. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul says about the third heaven, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. And I know that this man was caught up to paradise and heard inexpressible things. This description by Paul is consistent with a description of heaven from Jesus himself. When Jesus was being crucified on the cross, there were two robbers being crucified next to him. One of them made the realization who Jesus was and what Jesus can do. To that robber, who was about to die with Jesus, Luke chapter 23 verse 43 has Jesus saying, Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Undoubtedly referring to heaven. Now that we know heaven will be a place of paradise, a place where there is no more pain, suffering, or death, what we need to do is find where in the Bible a bunch of people are described as being in a place of paradise where there is no death, mourning, crying, or pain. So, we turn to the book of Revelation, which describes the end times in some detail, and see if we can identify such a scene. Revelation chapter 7 verses 9 to 17 reads, in part, as follows, Behold, a great multitude which no one could count, from every nation and all the tribes, peoples, and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes. Then one of the elders responded, saying to me, These who are clothed in the white robes, who are they? And where have they come from? I said to him, My Lord, you know. And he said to me, These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation. They will no longer hunger nor thirst, nor will the sun beat down on them, nor any scorching heat. And God will wipe every tear from their eyes. Without conceding any position, is it reasonable or at least fair to conclude that this scene is describing the rapture? In the rapture event, all Christians are taken up all of a sudden. We could expect over the course of thousands of years, the number of Christians should amount to millions if not billions of people from all over the world. Verse 9 refers to a great multitude, so much that no one can count, and from all over the world, and not just a specific group of people. Verse 16 describes this great multitude as no longer hungering, thirsting, being beaten down by the sun, and having their tears wiped away. That sounds like no more pain and suffering, which we would expect in paradise. Which means this multitude is likely in heaven. Now, if it is reasonable or at least a fair interpretation that this scene is describing the raptured Christians, then we can look for any signs of when this event took place. A good place to start is verse 13 to 14, in which the elder asks John, "These who are clothed in the white robes, who are they? And where have they come from?" To which John responds, "My Lord, you know." And so the elder describes where this multitude came from, saying, "These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation." Now, if this multitude came out of the great tribulation, then it follows that they must have been in the great tribulation. If they were in the great tribulation, then they could not have been raptured before the tribulation. So, if we find that the Christians were raptured in chapter 7 of the book of Revelation, then we can proceed backwards from here to see if we can identify what events took place before the rapture. Turning to chapter 6, we find a description of the 7 seals being opened. The first seal reveals a white horse with the rider going out to conquer. The second seal reveals a red horse with a rider who will take away the peace from the world. The third seal reveals a black horse representing famine. The fourth seal reveals a pale or ashen horse with death as the rider to kill with sword, famine, plague, and animals. So, the first 4 seals reveal scenes that are extremely troubling. Scenes that can reasonably be considered a period of tribulation. With the 5th seal, Christian martyrs are seen under an altar wondering when this will all end, to which they are told to wait a little longer. This brings us to Revelation chapter 6 verses 12 to 17. Here, after the first 5 seals are opened, which describe death and destruction, and the Christian martyrs are told to wait a little longer for it to come to an end, we see the 6th seal open. The 6th seal reveals a great earthquake, sun becoming black, the moon becoming like blood, and the stars falling from the sky. Then the people of the earth proclaim that the great day of God's wrath has now come. And it is immediately after this that we go to Revelation chapter 7, where we saw what appeared to be the rapture event. So, if all this distress, death, and destruction, which could reasonably be considered the tribulation period, occurred in chapter 6, and the rapture does not occur until chapter 7, then is it reasonable, based on what has been read so far, that the rapture takes place after a significant amount of tribulation, and not before the tribulation? If not, then consider the fact that this theory, as consistent with Jesus' own words about the end times, is recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In Matthew chapter 24 verse 29, Jesus expressly identifies 3 signs that occur immediately after the tribulation, but before his coming. The sun will be darkened, the moon stops giving off light, and the stars fall. After these events, in verses 30 to 31, Jesus describes himself coming on the clouds of the sky with his angels to gather together his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of the sky to the other. This essentially sounds like rapturing of Christians, his elect, from all over the world, north, east, south, and west. Comparing this with Mark chapter 13 verses 24 to 27, we see a very close correspondence of events. Like Matthew, Mark records that it is after the tribulation that the sun, moon, and stars show their signs, and after these signs that Jesus comes in the clouds to gather his elect from all over the world. Comparing this with Luke chapter 21 verses 25 to 28, we see some corroboration of these events. Specifically, Luke also identifies signs in the sun, moon, and stars. Although Luke does not mention the tribulation, Luke identifies the distress among the nations, which would correlate with the tribulation mentioned in Matthew and Mark. It is after these events that Luke states that Jesus comes in a cloud. So, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who wrote Revelation, each independently describes the signs in the sun, moon, and stars before Jesus comes to save the Christians. Now that we have seen some evidence against a pre-tribulation rapture, why is it important? For the sake of simplicity, let's say the rapture theories can be classified into two categories. The popular pre-tribulation rapture theory, in which all Christians are raptured before the Great Tribulation, and all the rest, which will be categorized as the non-pre-tribulation rapture theory, in which the Christians will experience at least some of the Great Tribulation. To be clear, there are more than two, but that will have to be a video for another day. For the sake of argument, let's say that the pre-tribulation rapture theory is correct. That means, before the sun and moon are darkened, and stars are falling, and there's destruction all over the world, Jesus descends on a cloud with his angels, and all Christians are raptured, starting with the dead, and then those who are still alive. What happens to the non-pre-tribulation rapture Christians? Well, they are still Christians, so they are still raptured, but they are surprised and exceedingly happy to be wrong because they don't have to experience the tribulation, and can enjoy eternity in heaven. And for the pre-tribulation rapture Christians, they too are in heaven. So, there is no problem if the pre-tribulation rapture theory is correct. Now, let's look at the alternative view. Let's assume the non-pre-tribulation rapture theory is correct. That means when the sun and moon are darkened, and stars are falling, and there's destruction all over the world, all Christians who are alive during the end times experience at least some of this great tribulation. So, what happens to the non-pre-tribulation rapture Christians? Nothing. They expected this, so they endure patiently and pray because they know that Jesus will be coming soon. But what happens to the pre-tribulation rapture Christians, who only know about the pre-tribulation rapture theory? If they thought they were supposed to go to heaven, but they didn't, at least two thoughts are likely to cross their minds. They might lose their faith and think there is no God and that's why they were not raptured to heaven. Or, they might think they did not make the cut to make it to heaven. Either way, they may believe they are stuck on earth as they experience the tribulation, and so they might do whatever they can to survive, including making the fatal mistake of taking the mark of the beast so that they can buy and sell goods. So remember, if you are a pre-tribulation rapture Christian, but at some point you think you have been left behind and find yourself in a great tribulation, don't lose faith. Just remember to refuse the mark.